Let me invite you to open your Bibles this morning to 1 Timothy chapter 3. Our text is 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 1 through 7, and we have been recognizing spiritual leaders. The Apostle Paul, in writing this text, has given qualifications for pastors or elders or overseers in God's church. Let me begin this morning by sharing a story that I heard this week from another pastor. It's probably fictional. At first it may seem a bit far-fetched, but hopefully at the end it will make the appropriate point. The story goes like this. Supposedly there is a community high in the mountains of Colorado. In fact, it's so high in the mountains that it has become a tourist place, and many folks come there because from that vantage point, they can look out on some of the most beautiful scenery known to man. Particularly one section of town, which is on the edge of a very sheer precipice, drops hundreds of feet below to a magnificent and beautiful valley. As the story goes, many people would go out and see this view and get as close to the edge as they could to see all of it. And it was not uncommon that someone should slip and fall over the edge. If they were fortunate and happened to fall in an area where there was a gradual slope, they might only come to the bottom with one or several broken bones. However, many of them fell off a rather sheer edge and plunged to their death. Even little children played in the area because of the view, and they too had lost their lives over the years. Well, the townspeople got together and they decided that something needed to be done about the situation, and so by vote of a committee, they decided to purchase several ambulances to be parked at the bottom of the hill. And the idea was that the ambulances would be there and to be ready and available to take the survivors to the hospital and the dead to the funeral home. Through the years, this particular ambulance program was successful. They delivered people as rapidly as they could to the respective place. However, it became quite costly to maintain the program with maintenance on the vehicles and funding of the salaries of the rescue staff. The committee eventually reconvened to see if there was a better and cheaper way to accomplish the same purpose, and somebody came up with the absolutely unthinkable idea of putting a fence at the top of a mountain. After some debate, it was determined that it might be a good idea, and so a fence was erected at the top of the mountain, and from that point on, there were no casualties. And the experiences have been markedly reduced. You say, that's a pretty bizarre story, isn't it? Well, yes, it is, and I told you it's fictional. And you might say, well, what's the point? Why did you tell us that story? The pastor went on to relate that as he read the story, he couldn't help but think of how that story reminds him of the church. The church is very good at assembling ambulance programs and trying to pick up the crushed and the dead from the bottom of the precipice, but not nearly so good as putting a fence at the top to stop them from ever falling in the first place. We have a myriad of ambulance programs meant to repair broken lives, and we are unsuccessful at trying to put the broken back together. And somewhere along the line, we need to recommit ourselves to maintaining a fence at the top, something that shields people from the initial danger, something that holds them back from the precipice to start with, something that stops the plunge of individuals and families and marriages. That fence at the top needs to be the leadership of God's church. God has designed His church in such a way that at the very top there should be Christ-like and exemplary lives with such character, with such spiritual integrity, that they would become the fence that shields the people from falling into danger. The church spends an awful lot of time and energy and money developing ambulance programs to pick up the pieces because there wasn't anybody at the top providing the fence. As you look at 1 Timothy 3, what you're seeing is a list of standards by which the leadership of God's church can put a barrier at the top so people don't fall off in the first place. It's a long way of saying that the leadership of the church is its protection, because the leadership of the church sets its standard. I'm not just talking about teaching sound doctrine, but I'm talking about setting godly examples. Just as the fence influences people from coming near danger, so godly leadership influences the people from coming near spiritual danger. The church, God's church, must have godly leadership. All of the programs that we design to pick up the pieces never adequately address the problem and are the result of inadequate leadership. The premium in God's church is really on its leaders. And the standards are high because the Spirit of God is saying, this is what I want all of you to be, and so I must establish a model for you. Now, we've been working our way through 1 Timothy chapter 3, and as we've been learning, the leaders of God's church don't operate according to a higher standard than the rest of us. It's just that the church leaders have a greater accountability to the same high standard that God has for everyone. Church leaders are to be the models for the church. Paul describes those character qualities in 1 Timothy 3, beginning in verse number 1, where he writes, "It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, uncontentious, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, lest he become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he may not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil." We have been working our way through this passage for a few weeks now, trying to really be rooted and grounded in what it has to say. I have let you know earlier that what Paul is doing in verses 1 through 7 is he's ensuring the proper selection of spiritual leadership by giving two non-negotiable qualifications for an overseer. In other words, he is putting up a fence. He's describing what men must be like in order to be models or examples or shepherds for God's flock. Those two non-negotiable qualifications are, number one, that an overseer must be marked by an internal call. We see that in verse number 1. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of an overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. It's a desire that comes from within him. But not only must he be marked by an internal call, he must also be marked by external character. You see it in verses 2 through 7, where he summarizes by saying that an overseer then must be above reproach. It's that umbrella category of above reproach that has been broken down into four main observable categories. The first one we've been working through in verses 2 and 3, and that is that this man must have integrity in his personal life. What does that look like? Well, he's to be the husband of one wife. He's to be temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, and then verse 3 says, not addicted to wine. We see a similar requirement in Titus chapter 1 and verse number 7. It means not one who sits long at his wine. The Greek word is one word that means, the New American Standard has translated it addicted to wine. It literally comes from para, meaning beside or alongside, and oinos, which means wine, and it describes a person who spends too much time beside the wine. In other words, this person cannot be preoccupied or overindulgent whenever it comes to alcohol. The concern here is not whether an overseer should practice total abstinence, but frequent association with alcohol and abuse. But this qualification goes further than just being a drunkard, because obviously someone who gets drunk would not be qualified to lead in ministry. Drunkenness is a sin, and persistent drunks require the loving care of church discipline. It's true that the Bible does not explicitly forbid the consumption of alcohol for a believer, but it does prohibit drunkenness. Let me say it again. Drinking alcohol is a liberty of which believers may partake. In fact, in 1 Timothy 5:23, Paul told Timothy to take a little wine for his stomach for medicinal reasons. Evidently, the water wasn't very pure, and the alcohol helped to kill some of the bacteria that was in the water and would help his stomach. And so the Bible never forbids or prohibits a believer from partaking of alcohol, but the Bible does have some interesting things to say about alcohol in the life of a leader. Proverbs 31 and verses 4 and 5 say, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, lest they drink and forget what is decreed and pervert the rights of the afflicted." The writer of Proverbs is calling kings to serve others and to serve them well. And in doing so, they are never to allow alcohol to weaken their reasoning or cloud their judgment. For those serving as spiritual leaders in the Old Testament, Leviticus 10, 9 through 11 has a very specific instructions for specific individuals. It says this, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the tent of meeting, so that you may not die. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations, and so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean, and so as to teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them through Moses. Wine and strong drink were forbidden to the priest while they were on duty, presumably so that they could faithfully carry out their responsibilities and not incur the judgment of their God." Sadly, not all spiritual leaders followed biblical instruction. Isaiah 28 and verses 7 and 8 said, "And these also reel with wine and stagger from strong drink. The priest and the prophet reel with strong drink. They are confused by wine. They stagger from strong drink. They reel while having visions. They totter when rendering judgment. For all the tables are full of filthy vomit, without a single clean place." It's quite a picture for spiritual leadership, isn't it? It doesn't come to any surprise to any of us that alcohol dulls one's mental and emotional stability, hindering our ability to make sound decisions. And an overseer is not to have the reputation or the lifestyle of being a drinker. Again, that is not to say that some in spiritual leadership don't occasionally drink. On a very personal level, since becoming a Christian in 1988, by God's grace, I've been a teetotaler. In other words, I don't drink. I was a bartender prior to coming to faith in Christ, and so I was very experienced and well-versed in the use and the consumption of alcohol. I understand that the Bible does not explicitly forbid the consumption of alcohol, but personally, I choose to abstain, and do so for two primary reasons. One is because of past experience, and the other is because of present example. In my past experience, alcohol played a very destructive role in my life personally, with my parents. And then whenever I became of age, it almost led me, because of my abuse of it, to death at an early age. But it's also just the present example that I try to live with on a daily basis, and I have chosen to allow love for others to limit my liberty. If I were to drink in front of others, it could serve as a bad example for them. And because of an inability to provide self-control for themselves, it might lead them into serious sin and trouble. In other words, they might choose to justify their own personal indulgence because of an example that they had seen me set. And so as a result, I choose to abstain. Although I don't ask any of our elders or our staff to abstain from the consumption of alcohol, I do ask them to consider the example they may set. And so if they choose to partake of that liberty, that they would be very discreet in the way they do so, so as not to set a bad example for others. I guess the question is, since we're making this personal for all of us, and we understand that these aren't requirements just for spiritual leaders, but really for all of us, and leaders are to be the models, are you addicted to wine? Do you tarry long beside alcohol? I guess maybe a better question to ask is, are you aware of what you do and the example that you may set for others? You may be in full control of that. Some are, some aren't. But whenever you do partake of the liberties that you can enjoy as a believer, are you aware of the impact that you may be having upon others? He doesn't stop there with not being addicted to wine. He goes on to give another prohibition, and that is that you are not pugnacious. Now, it's not a word that we use very often, is it? Are you pugnacious? People might say, if you tell me what that is, I've got a pug dog at home, but I don't know what pugnacious is. It means a striker or a giver of blows. It means that you're not somebody who's violent, that you like to solve things with your fist. You deal with a lot of different type of people in ministry. Some are very pleasant and easy to work with, and others not so much. And what he's saying here is that you can't solve the problems by being quick-tempered or resorting to physical or verbal violence whenever someone disagrees with you. You can't be like Nehemiah in the Old Testament and lay hands on someone and show them the way of the Lord more perfectly. You must respond calmly and kindly. Elders must handle highly emotional, interpersonal conflicts and deeply felt doctrinal disagreements between believers and really sometimes unbelievers. Elders are often at the center of very tense situations. Some you'd just rather not be a part of, but God has put you in that place in order to try to help people to work through their differences. And so a bad-tempered or a pugnacious man or someone who's prone to throw a punch is not going to be able to solve any problems, but is probably only going to make things worse. Now, does that mean that a leader can't ever disagree with someone, or that we should make pleasing people our priority in life and ministry? And the answer is, of course not. But as one person wrote, a good leader knows how to take the heat without spreading the flames. That's something that maybe is a good thing to kind of think through personally. Am I a person who is given to blows? He doesn't stop there, but he continues with giving the contrast. Not addicted to wine, nor pugnacious, but gentle. The word "but" is a very strong word of contrast. In other words, instead of tarrying long at the bottle and being a striker or a fighter, which sometimes comes with drinking too much, right? Instead of being pugnacious or a person who is a hothead, instead you are gentle. You are gracious. You are kind. You are forbearing. You are equitable. You are quick to pardon. You are not one who is prone to hold a grudge. The word gentle is made up of a compound word, over and reasonable. You were overly reasonable in the way that you deal with people. It has a very intensified meaning. It denotes a humble and patient steadfastness which is able to submit to being treated unjustly, to be maltreated without hatred or malice. And the reason why is because you're trusting in God to sort it out in the end. The word has been translated as having a sweet reasonableness that sometimes means listening to criticism without reacting negatively. Again, the word gentle doesn't mean that you're weak or passive. It doesn't mean that you don't stop from standing strong or even being confrontational whenever the occasion demands. But it does mean that you view God's children like your own, and that you are forgiving, and that you are forbearing, and that you are seeking their highest good. I can tell you that there are a lot of challenges in the church, and there are opportunities, regular opportunities for church leaders to have courage. And if you don't have courage, you will not be willing to deal with the sticky and difficult issues of the ministry. And if elders aren't courageous in dealing with real problems, the church will lose its conviction and what God has called it to do. So the elder has to have courage to deal with difficulties, but he must also be gentle in doing so. He must serve God's people like a tender shepherd, which means that he is sympathetic with weakness and compassionate with the wounded. Now, if you're wondering what that looks like practically, it means that a gentle leader doesn't demand his own way or lash out whenever he's treated unfairly, nor does he feel threatened whenever other people disagree with him. If he did, he would not be a leader. Nor does he let people walk all over him. But a gentle leader's words and actions are seasoned with grace and forgiveness and kindness. And if you think about it, that's quite a contrast to a pugnacious man, a hothead who is ready to throw down if you cross him, right? A gentle man exhibits a willingness to yield and patiently makes allowances for the weakness and the ignorance of others. He refuses to retaliate for wrongs done by others and does not insist upon the letter of the law or his own personal rights. Again, trying to make this as personally applicable as possible, I would ask you the question, which defines you more? Are you more pugnacious or are you more gentle? Do you insist upon, even demand to have things your own way? And how do you respond whenever you don't get your way? Do you become difficult to live with? Do you give someone a verbal lashing? You might not use your hands in a physical way, but do you use your tongue in a verbal way? How would your spouse say that you respond whenever you don't get what you want? How would your kids say that you respond? Or maybe, how would you say that your children respond whenever they don't get what it is that they want? Do you move away from fights, or are you prone to move toward them? Those are great questions to ask because it's a standard that God has for us. He goes on to say that not only not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle. And here's the complement to being gentle, uncontentious. The word means without fighting. And it's more of the verbal aspect of this instead of the physical aspect. The word for uncontentious comes from the root meaning without quarrels or without disputes. In other words, it means that you're peaceable, you're not argumentative, that you don't have to always win the conversation. One who is contentious or quarrelsome is unable to get along with others and accept their views, and perhaps has deeper personality flaws as well. Well, this is the opposite of that. The false teachers in Ephesus were known for their quarrels, their bickering. You see it in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5 and chapter 6 and verses 4 and 5. And a leader who's prone to being contentious is really going to produce discord instead of harmony. Really, any believer for that matter should be about promoting peace upon God's people and seeking to build a unified church and not trying to get your way and tear things apart. Phil Ryken, in his commentary on the pastorals, had a great comment. He said, "An argumentative man is the worst kind of man to have on a board of elders. When overseers discuss the ministry of the church, they need to be able to express their views clearly and charitably, because the best decisions emerge from lively discussion. On occasion, it is even appropriate for objections to be raised, but this must never be done with a contentious spirit." I can tell you that we have enjoyed for quite some time a season of peace amongst our elders. And so they are some of the most gracious men with whom to work. And I'm thankful for them because we need each other. There is a wealth of wisdom there. And our men welcome disagreement and talking through and working through issues because we want what the Lord wants and not what we want. I can tell you that men who speak wrongly in those types of settings are quick to seek forgiveness and confess that, and I have the concern to maintain the unity. And it's just been a special privilege to serve with these men who are uncontentious. As one writer said, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Warren Wiersbe has said this, and I thought it was fantastic. Short tempers do not make for long ministries. So let me ask you, are you trigger happy in the way that you relate to others? Are you quick on the draw, itching for a good argument? Let me ask it this way. Do you have to have the last word? Do you have to make sure that your opinion is known? It's something that really breeds contention, and the Bible talks about it in a lot of different places. Proverbs says that it's better for a man to dwell on the corner of a rooftop than with a contentious woman. So ladies, let me ask you, would your husband say that you are contentious? Or let me turn that around. Husbands, would your wife say that you are contentious? It's a standard that is very applicable to where we live, and especially to our leaders. Chuck Swindoll wrote, "A godly leader is able to keep his gun holstered until he needs it for the true enemy. He has learned to listen to others and cooperate with them and work toward building them up instead of tearing them down." Paul leaves us with one last qualification that we find in verse number 3, and that is free from the love of money. It's a compound word meaning love, and silver marries the two and puts an alpha privative on the front, negating the whole thing, meaning that no greediness can be found within the heart of an overseer. People that were not greedy were the type of men that Jethro in the Old Testament commanded Moses to recruit to help him to lead Israel. Exodus 18 and verse 21, Jethro told Moses, "You shall select out of all of the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens." This was not the type of sons that the prophet Samuel had. In fact, 1 Samuel 8 and verse number 3 say that Samuel's sons, however, did not walk in Samuel's ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice. The New Testament in Luke 16 and verse number 14 describes the Pharisees of Jesus' day as lovers of money. In 2 Timothy 3 and verse number 2, Paul says that the people of the last days will be lovers of money. Unfortunately, many people don't understand that money itself is not the problem. It's our attitude toward it that gets us into trouble. Since the days of the Apostle Paul, and even to our own day today, men have tried to use the ministry in order to get wealthy. You see it with the prosperity gospel and the health and wealth generation of preachers, the name it and claim it, the blab it and grab it group. They are all about financial gain to fund their lavish lifestyles. But it's clear from the pastorals that the spiritual leadership gives opportunity for greed to grow in a man's heart. It gives a platform by which people can get wealthy. In Ephesus, in 1 Timothy 6, in verse number 5, some thought that godliness was a means of great gain. Titus 1 and verse 11, in Crete were those who were teaching things they should not teach for the sake of sordid gain. And we see that again and again and again, preachers telling people what they want to hear in order to make the big bucks. Paul had set himself as an example among the elders of Ephesus. In Acts 20 and verse 33, he said, I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes. You yourself know that these hands have ministered to my own needs and to the men who were with me. Gene Getz points out that the scriptures do not teach that money per se is the problem, nor do they teach that it's wrong to have lots of money. What they do teach is that it's a serious violation of God's will when we love it. That is why Paul said that a mature Christian man is free not from money, but from the love of money. Solomon understood this, and so he wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse number 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with his income. This too is vanity. Jude issues a word of warning to these types of men. In Jude 11, woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain, and for pay they have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam and perished in the rebellion of Korah. You say, well, what can ever help with this cancer of loving money or the cancer of covetousness? There's only one thing, and it's the cultivation of contentment. Hebrews 13 and verse 5 says, let your character be free from the love of money, being content with what you have, for he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 8, Paul says, if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many a pang. Like a powerful drug, the love of money can delude the judgment of even the best men. And the love of money is a magnet that seems to pull you into the darkness of greed. And to be free from the love of money is to be outside of its magnetic field and safe from its allure. Jason Allen writes, if money is driving your ambition, it will cloud your judgment and compromise your ability to discern ministry opportunities. In other words, if you follow the money, you're likely to follow it right out of the ministry and perhaps even into ruin. There was a well-known pastor and preacher who received a letter inviting him to speak at a specific event, and he wrote back and thanked the person who had extended the invitation and said that but he was unable to attend the event and speak there, but he was grateful for the invitation anyway. The man wrote back and said, listen, we not only want you to come and speak at our event, but we also want to pay you a $5,000 honorarium if you'll come. Well, now this pastor was in a bit of a dilemma. He said never in his entire ministry had he ever made a $5,000 honorarium, and nor did he ever expect to. He said, but if he responded and accepted the offer, then it would be obvious that he was a man who could be bought. And if he refused the opportunity still, he knew that he would be crazy. And so he tried to think through how to respond the best, and he wrote back and he said, I will be happy and pleased to come and speak if you will allow me to use the honorarium to donate to a ministry that I've been trying to help. And so that was a careful way of accepting that opportunity and yet still guarding his heart against the love of money. The best attitude to have toward material wealth is one of a healthy sense of detachment, but not irresponsibility. Paul says in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 17, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited, or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good and to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. I guess the question to ask you this morning is, what place does money play in your life? Didn't ask you how much of it you had. Didn't ask you how much of it you don't have. But how important is it to you? How much of your waking time do you spend thinking about how to acquire more? Or maybe how to keep what it is that you have? How high does it rank on the things that are most valuable to you in life? Well, those are great questions to ask and to think through as we're really understanding what it means to have integrity in your personal life. We're not done with the qualifications, but it's where Paul has us here, and he's reminding us that there are two non-negotiable qualifications for an overseer. It starts with an internal call, and it continues with your external character. Ultimately, there must be integrity in your personal life. It's a fence that God has provided at the forefront because it helps each of us to know how it is that we're supposed to be living. I guess I just want to ask you this morning, what's the Lord teaching you about His character as we're working our way through this? His standards for His church, His standard for your own heart, and what areas you need to be working on. It might involve your appetites and not being addicted to wine. It might involve your relationships, not being pugnacious but gentle or peaceable. And it might involve addressing material desires so that you are free from the love of money. Practical, personal, helpful, as we're seeking to honor the Lord. Father, as we work through these different qualifications for a spiritual leader, we're reminded that none of us are able to live in this manner apart from your grace. I want to thank you for sending your only Son, Jesus Christ, into the world, who was born of a virgin, who lived a sinless life, and who died a sacrificial death in order that sinners might be saved. Father, thank you for raising Jesus from the dead. Thank you that He's alive right now and seated at your right hand. Your word tells us that He's going to return at any time in accordance with your command. Father, I pray that as we work through these passages together, that your Spirit who inspired this word would illuminate this word and that He would be our teacher. Lord, I pray for each heart, starting with my own, that you would apply this word to our hearts and lives and that we would understand what it is that you want from us. May we be humble before you and dependent upon you, asking that you would do the work that only you can do. Lord, we know that we participate in sanctification, but we know that it's you, that it's work, even giving us the desire. We're grateful this morning that no matter whether we meet these standards or whether we don't, you still love us because of your Son. There's nothing that can separate us from your love. Out of your grace, you have adopted us into your family, and we are your children forevermore. That's only possible because of the gospel. And so we just celebrate that fact this morning. Father, I pray for each and every one here that you would help us by your grace to live godly lives for your glory. Bless us as we go. Remind us of your grace. Help us to look to you and dependent upon you for everything. For it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.